Good evening. Welcome to the Brockton School Committee Finance Subcommittee meeting. Today is Tuesday, October 29th. Time on arrival is 6:08. A few minutes behind schedule with some technical difficulties, but thank you to the wonderful staff at the BCA for getting this corrected. This meeting will be held and accessible to the public via Comcast Channel 8 in 1071 HD version and online via this link, www.youtube.com/TheBrocktonChannels. Prior to this meeting, I will call this meeting to order and establish a quorum. Mrs. Sullivan? Here. Mr. Vega? Here. Mr. Gomes? Here. Ms. Oliver? Here. Chairman Mayor Robert Sullivan? Here. Mr. Sullivan? Here. Myself, Tony Rodriguez, Vice Chair, is here, and Superintendent Taliani here as well. Again, welcome to the Finance Subcommittee meeting. The agenda items today, we'll be getting a financial update by the Superintendent of Schools with also an overview of the accounts procedure, unpaid bills, and school committee expenses for FY 22, 23, 24, and 25, and other business. At this time, I will turn this over to Superintendent Dr. Taliani.
Thank you so much.
And also, we do have our Business Administrator, Mrs. Boyer, and City CFO, Troy Clarkson, and also on Zoom is TJ Plant from Open Architects as well. And I will take a seat back here somewhere.
All right, good evening, everyone. Sound good? Yes, all right. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you here this evening to provide you with an update on our finances. As I will be doing for the remainder of the year, I'll be providing monthly updates to the school committee regarding our finances, and I will be using the independent investigation that was commissioned by the city as their framework for these presentations. So the independent investigation provided 15 recommendations, 11 of which are within the school department's control. So those will be the ones that I will be focusing on. So recommendation A was to build a budget based on actual expense information from prior years. So now this is a very basic and fundamental budgeting practice, but unfortunately, as we know, we've heard it talked about, and we saw it in the investigation, that it did pose a challenge in the past, and it continues to do so, because if you're not building a budget based on actual expenses, obviously that impacts you year over year. So now, in the past, the budgets that were created here, or not now, but in the past, the budgets that were created here were largely estimates, and there were lines built in as cushions, and money was transferred out of those lines. I know there's the notorious 199 account, and when it was needed by departments or for different initiatives, rather than projecting out the costs for those initiatives the prior year, which is what we are aiming towards. Also, the budget was not detailed enough and not broken down appropriately, but also the actual expenditures were not available for public consumption as well. So these are all issues that we are hoping to solve. So recommendation B was actually specifically about the level of detail and transparency of our budget. So the FY23 budget, which was the one focused on by the investigation, was broken down into 4 overly broad categories, and for the first time, the line that served as a cushion, again, the 199 account, also notoriously, was made up of 80% of the total budget. And again, this was because of some internal issues and COVID, et cetera. But again, the FY23 budget did not include any employee information, and it was not broken down by school, department, or position. So now, with the help of our school and city CFO and Open Architects, we have made some headway with the FY25 budget, but last year was really spent doing a lot of cleanup, so that the budget that was presented still didn't have the level of detail that we desire for FY25. So moving forward, our goals will be to delineate how funds are distributed between different schools, departments, and positions. We also want to be able to quantify increases in employee counts and payroll increases, and we will be providing detailed backup information as well. So similar to the city budget that is presented, we'll be indicating the proposed budget, an adopted budget, actual expenses, and the percentage change. So as we think about both recommendation A and B together and where we are, I will say that, again, last year was a cleanup year, and this year is mostly going to be a transition year. So we're still unable to truly build a budget based on actuals because, as many of you are aware, we did have a bit of a deficit, and last year's actual expenditures are a bit skewed because we did have to put hiring on hold. And so the expenditures don't look like what they should have looked like in a normal year. So as a result, we've used the expenditures, we had to sort of build the budget we are currently in without that true reflection of where we should be. So again, this is kind of where we're going to be transitioning and catching up. But that being said, the FY25 budget was built by a larger group of individuals, so that's great, and that's movement in the right direction. This year, when we build the budget, we will have all stakeholders at the table. Also, the FY25 budget broke down salaries by person as opposed to showing a lump sum for personnel, so that was an improvement. We have dissolved the notorious 199,99099 account. There are still 199 accounts because that does have a meaning, but this particular account, which was kind of the catch-all, has been dissolved, and we are in the process of drilling down to create more detailed lines that are not only aligned with DESE, but that also provide a greater level of transparency. However, as we do that, again, we're doing a lot of cleanup. So we have had to transfer $7 million into different lines. And I want to be clear that these transfers are not like the old transfers that were done to cover expenditures that we hadn't accounted for. This is still part of the process of creating a clear and detailed budget for moving forward. And again, for FY26, we'll be starting the budget season early. Since our budget expenditures were, a little bit harder to bank on last year, it is even more important to get all of the school leaders and school department heads and stakeholders at the table, which has always been my preference, but we actually need them at the table now to help them fill in the gaps of the, of the information that we do lack. So our FY26 budget will include actuals from this year. It will be more indicative of a normal year of spending, and we will also have hopefully begun our migration to position control, which will give us a better indication of our personnel expenses, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. So as we're looking at our transfers, again, as we clean up the lines, we're thinking about two different things. First, I want to ensure that this group, the school committee, understands any and all budget transfers, which are all easily explainable, and some transfers are in an effort for us to be more detailed. Some are in an effort for us to be aligned to the DESE codes, because that makes it easier to pull the end of year report. And even some are as simple as moving from what was Edison Day to now Champion. There are some areas that we have to clean up there too. So I'll be providing a detailed rundown of that information to the school committee, and we will also be making that information publicly available. But the second thing that we're thinking about when we are thinking about transfers is we need to solidify a transfer policy here on the school committee level. So a draft policy, which was courtesy of Open Architects, will be coming your way. But to give you some background, the purpose of this policy is to establish procedures for transferring budgeted funds between accounts within the district's budget, again, to ensure fiscal responsibility, transparency, and compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. So the policy that we want to adopt should apply to all budgetary transfers within the district, including transfers between departments, programs, or cost centers. It will be applicable to all district staff involved in the management of financial resources. And budget transfers are, an essential for the effective management of district resources, but they should be conducted in a manner that supports the district's goals and procedures. So the district does allow for budget transfers under specific conditions, and all transfers, again, are going to need to be properly documented, properly approved, and also tracked in order to ensure that we are being aligned with financial policies and legal requirements. So we have the different kinds of transfers broken down into 3 different areas: intradepartmental transfers, interdepartmental transfers, and emergency transfers. So here is the flow chart of how we're going to propose for budget transfers to occur. Now again, I won't go into too much detail about this now. It will be articulated in the policy that you receive. And again, this is only a proposal and a draft. So you'll receive it and you'll be able to give it some consideration to what it should look like. But there will be 6 basic steps that will start first with the initiation of the transfer, of course. Second, the approval process, which will be different based on whether it is intradepartmental, interdepartmental, or an emergency transfer. Third, there will be documentation and justification. And then we have 2 compliance checks built in. So the fourth step will be to check that there are limitations and restrictions on these transfers and that we're not violating, any state or federal laws. The 5th will be reporting requirements specifically to this body about how often we'll be providing those updates, but then also, again, just for good, transparent practices, we will be posting them online as well. And then at the end, compliance check that will include all of the transfers, so just a more holistic view. So now recommendation C was that the school department should maintain a human resources personnel system that accurately tracks employees by location, position, and funding source, which we fully agree with. This is definitely something we're going to be working on, and we do have a lot to do in the HR space. So I wanted to give you a few updates on what we are tackling now. So one of the easiest ways to kind of do this is to make sure that it is indicated in your Munis system. And so I do applaud this district for already having Munis. That was something we worked very hard to bring into my last district so that we could even have position control. So now it's just about making sure we're leveraging our Munis system as best we can, because it is, the Cadillac of systems. So we have met with Munis. And here you see a quote for some of the services. So what they're going to be doing for us is they're going to be coming in for 2 days to look at our HR system and processes, 2 days for our financial systems and processes, and then they will be helping us to start implementing position control, and that's going to be a huge effort around the district. It's going to take a lot of training. It's going to take a lot of work, so I will provide you with a full implementation plan later, but we've at least got the ball rolling. We have been working with the city, who is also interested in doing this on the city side, so we have a quote for the schools, but we also, you will see, have a quote for the city side for if we do it both as the schools and the city. And also one of the things we're looking at with Munis that they recommend is having a content manager that again scans a lot of the documents and makes sure that we are, we have everything documented. I know it's much more complicated than that. I'm being very, that is my understanding of it. There is a much more technical understanding of it. So that's where we are with Munis. So we're excited to be moving on that front. Also, I wanted to give you an update on our vacancies. So this list gives you a holistic view of how many vacancies we still have for those positions that were budgeted last year. And so I know school committee, this looks familiar to you. I've sent this to you over time. And so you can see here that we do have 64 vacancies still from the positions that we had budgeted back in the spring. We do have on the bottom line, you'll be able to see that we have paraprofessionals and long-term subs who are serving in these roles. So if we count those positions that are not filled with someone who is certified for their role, we actually have 96 vacancies. But for thinking about actual roles, we have 64. And then because of several things, growing enrollment, we've had an influx, as we knew we would, of multilingual learners. We actually had to add some kindergarten classes before the start of the school year. So I know school committee, sounds familiar because I've sent memos about positions and classrooms we needed to add. But then also, as you all know, we did need to provide compensatory services from services that were not provided last year. And so that was not something that we had funded for in the budget. But here I wanted you to get an idea of those unfunded positions that we did have to add. These are the ones that are funded by our local budget, not by our grant. So we've added 55 positions. Now that means we've posted 55 positions, but I want to be clear, just like with the left-hand side of the chart, it's really hard to hire, especially at this time of year. So the positions that we have filled, we've only filled 16 of those. I did want to break down too for you how many of those positions are for compensatory services, and that's 36 of those 55 are specifically for compensatory services, and we have filled 10 of them. So as we think about this and as we're thinking about these positions, because it is scary to know that you have positions that we're not funded for, at the same time, we have to provide these compensatory services because that means we did not provide these services last year. So we are required to provide them. That being said, if you kind of look at this as we have 64 vacancies of budgeted positions versus the number of positions we've actually added and filled, we're still well under the number of, holistically, the number of positions that we budgeted. Now that's a very simple view of it, and I will certainly give you a more drilled down by salary so that you can see really what the cost implications are here for these vacancies and for these unfunded positions. But I wanted you to at least get an idea of where we are. Another thing that we have done on the school side is we are working to automate our systems. So we have a lot of different work, and obviously it's a very big district with a lot of employees, so we want to make sure that we are automating our systems, right, and moving away from all of those paper processes that are less efficient, and even more than them being less efficient, they are harder to track. You know, so that ends up being a difficulty for us, again, as we're trying to figure out what our expenditures are. So we have been automating processes. We started with 2 different processes that we've automated internally. And it seems very simple, but I just want to thank the team who did this. It was a very large undertaking to kind of get a workflow in and to make sure that it was, you know, going in all of the right directions. So there is an internal flow that says, okay, no here, yes here, where does it go next? And it can get bounced through multiple different people. But the 2 forms that we really focused on were the personnel change request form and the pre-approval form for additional compensation. Now it's really important that these are automated or digitized because, again, this is how we're able to then track these expenditures for next year. So it serves the dual purpose of being efficient and faster, but also we are able to then track it. So this is just kind of what it looks like on our end. So it's still the same form that we were using before, but now it's online. And then, of course, it feeds into a spreadsheet. And then once it is approved by everybody, so there's a sample of the not approved email to the requester, which means they have to go back and do some more due diligence. Maybe they need an object and org code. Maybe they need to reallocate funds, that kind of thing. Or maybe it is actually approved, and so they get to move forward. But everybody in the workflow will receive confirmation that, yes, it was approved or not approved. So recommendation D was that the school finance department must track spending relative to the budget approved by the school committee. And so one of the things that we are doing in order to make sure that we are staying true to this is by creating and providing to you all budget reports. And again, the regular reports should match the detailed budget categories and include updated projections of the anticipated costs that remain to be incurred. Again, this is a little bit tricky, and it's going to be a tricky year with these because, as I mentioned, the budget that you approved may not have been the more detailed budget that we are seeking to transition to. So again, it's going to be a little bit of a transition year, and we, thank you for bearing with us. Also, one of the things that we're working on is that our chart of accounts was generated back in 1997, so that's something we also need to update. So there's a lot of work that goes into every single process. So what you see here is the year-to-date budget report that you received. So we have two budget reports. So this is the one that was created by Open Architects. It's a 3-page kind of at-a-glance summary that breaks it down by school, department, et cetera. We also, and you are still receiving, for purposes of continuity and transparency, you still receive the report that you always received, which is the city CFO created budget report. So you'll now have two. You'll have the one that you've always received that's really drilled down. I know it's a huge packet that you guys get of about 45 pages, but then you'll also get this one to just a way to kind of digest that information in an easier way. And again, tonight, because I know this is a lot of information, I'm kind of giving an overview, but since I'm going to be doing monthly updates, I will be kind of drilling down into each of these topics more as the year goes on. But I just want you to be familiar with all the things that we're going to be talking about and the terms we'll be using. So these are the budget reports. So this is the Open Architects one, and what was it not here? So also, I think it comes later, but I did want to mention too that we also have placed both of these reports online. So they have both been placed for October, and they will be placed online for every month moving forward. So now here is recommendation, oh, there it is. So there's the, I'm having trouble with my clicker tonight. Where should I be pointing? Oh, is it there? Okay, sorry. so this is where you can see, so recommendation F was that the school department should be sharing this key data, and we want to be really transparent. So this is just a screenshot of the website to show that this is where we're going to be posting this information. Back to E, if I can. Here we go. Okay. So recommendation E, sorry, I went out of order. Recommendation E is that the school department's accounting system, Munis, must match the school department's budget categories. So the accounts that are listed in BPS's Munis system actually don't match the categories in the school department's budget, and that is one of the things that we're working on. And so the amounts that the finance department entered for certain budget categories in Munis actually differed already from the budget that was voted on and approved by school committee. So those two did not match, which is certainly problematic. So it's therefore a little bit impossible for our finance department to not only accurately spend relative to that budget, since it's not the same one as the one in Munis, but also to make sure, again, we're aligning category by category with that detailed approved budget. So here's a picture sort of what you saw last year in the budget. Again, this is what we want to move away from. You'll see here that it was just BEA salaries, and it was just one chunk, right? So we moved away from that. We've gotten closer to like individual schools, individual budgets, but we certainly need to be drilling down into this to where you can see for every school the individual salaries, the individual increases. That's the most appropriate way for the budget to be presented. All right, so recommendation H is that the school committee must, as required by Mass law, approve vendor and payroll warrants. Now, this is a recommendation that is going to take some time and collaboration with the city because the required process is that the school committee here is supposed to review and sign vendor warrants after examining the school bills to ensure that, again, that it's all being done appropriately. So they should be reviewing, they should be approving, and they should be signing off on the bills and the payrolls. And the recommendation from this particular report is that we have at least 2 members of the school committee who are designated to be the signatories to approve those bills and payroll. Our current process is a little bit, something we got to work on. So right now, each individual department or school actually sends their paper invoices to the city auditor's office directly. And that happens without the oversight of the school finance department, myself, and the school committee. So this is very different from what I'm used to, where I used to kind of see these things beforehand, and so this is certainly a process. Now, then what happens is the city auditor enters invoices to create warrants and puts them into Munis, and then the treasurer cuts the checks and posts the warrants. So once that is complete, then the expenses hit our general ledger. So this is a process that we certainly need to work on. It is not going to be as easy to solve because timelines are really important here. People need to get paid on time. And because of the turnaround of when we get the bills and the payrolls and how that works, we are trying to solve for this, and I will be reporting back on how we've done, and we are collaborating with the city on this, but it is going to take us some time to get there. But I wanted, again, for you to just be aware that this is one of the recommendations that we are going to be working towards. So we have a couple different options that we're looking at. So two options in particular, again, in order to allow the school committee to have them, where the BPS staff creates the vendor and payroll warrants that are signed off then electronically by the CFO, the superintendent, and subsequently to school committee members. And then that would have to be sent by to City Hall by Friday before 2 p.m. And so I've included like some of the benefits and implications we've been discussing if we were to go with option one. Option two is to keep the process as is, where BPS departments sort of submit the payroll and vendor invoices directly to City Hall. So that would be no current change, but then City Hall would be then accountable to ensure that the bills and payroll were still signed off by the school committee. So I don't think this, if we kept everything the same, I don't think it precludes us from not having them reviewed by school committee. I think we would just have to figure out if the city has these, how are they going to be, how and when are they going to be reviewed by the school committee? So that is what we need to be moving towards. All right, so recommendation K is that the school department and the city do need to bridge the artificial divide between the two systems and work collaboratively on school finances. And one of the recommendations that they actually had was to form a joint committee to meet quarterly during the fiscal year, and that they could then work to review the financial reports, the actual expenses, the budget, and then also help to sort of problem solve some of these issues that I've been bringing up, also help us to troubleshoot. You know, there are a couple of options for how we would do that. We could do this, but I would certainly recommend doing this in an open meeting, posted kind of like we do here, again, just to promote transparency so everybody knows what we're working on and what we're moving towards. We also wonder or recommend that perhaps a third-party facilitator could support us in order to help move us in the right direction. And that we should also, if we were to create that joint committee, in order to make sure that it is a productive use of time, is to actually create beforehand a set of, an action plan, a timeline, and a set of deliverables that we want to have by the end of it. And so as the city and the school department are working to address some of these challenges, you know, we are hitting some issues. And basically what we are really running up against right now is the fact that, for example, I think the warrants and payroll are a great example, where we're actually not doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? We're not fulfilling that law that the school committee should be reviewing it. The challenge is, how do we get there while still moving processes forward? And so that's kind of the rub that we're having right now. The school department, obviously, as the leader of the school department, my philosophy is always going to be that we need to keep the work moving. We need to keep processes going. While we fix the systems, you know, students still need to get educated, teachers still need to get hired, buses still need to be running, you know, all of the things that make a school department run. The students should be at the center of our focus, and we should be focusing on making sure that because we are working on processes and procedures that we haven't had, they should not feel an interruption to services. Families should not feel an interruption. You know, staff members shouldn't feel, you know, the ramifications of us making these changes or improvements, rather. And then on the city side, of course, you know, they're also up against the fact that, well, we haven't been adhering to these, laws and these requirements all of this time. And so there's a level of urgency of, no, we got to do it now and we got to do it right. So I think we're meeting some challenges with what is the best way to get us to where we need to be. And so that's some of the things that we're working on. I have listed some of the challenges here that we're facing. I have 2 different slides. Again, I'm not going to get into them deeply, but at the subsequent presentation, I can sort of give you an update on where we are with some of these things. It goes from everything from, certifying our net school spending carryover amount to our revolving accounts, our end of year report, also making sure that we really that we are having meetings that have deliverables and that we are meeting certain measurable goals. So these are the things that we are working on right now. And again, hopefully at the upcoming meetings, I'll be able to report back to you that we have made improvements in these areas. But I just wanted to make sure, again, to document these things, as I think it's important for us to be very clear. I don't think any of us are saying that this system or that our budget is perfect or that our fiscal, systems are perfect right now. I think we recognize right now that they are not, that things are not working as they should. But I think it's very important, especially as we learn from mistakes of the past, that we need to be very transparent about this. We need to be acknowledging the challenges that we're facing, and we need to be upfront about it with the community. So again, all of these I will drill down into deeply at my monthly updates. And then the final recommendation that we have control over is recommendation O, which is to have outside consultants who can reassess whether BPS, which is the question we've been asking ourselves, should maintain in-house transportation or not. And so at the special meeting this evening, I'll be providing you an update on where we are with that transportation audit, but I can at least say we do have initial findings. No definitive answers yet, but we are moving in the right direction and making progress on that. And at this point, I'll take questions, but I think I'll do it there. That's okay. And also, obviously, for any questions, very detailed questions, I will certainly defer to our, school CFO, our city CFO, and our consultants. But I will do the best I can to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for that presentation. I'll open up the floor to any questions to members. I'll start with Mrs. Olive, followed by Mr. Gomes, Mr. Vega. In that order.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Great work from your team, great plan, and just the last page, it's a little frustration, just to read everything that you're trying to work with your team and trying to implement, and there's been roadblocks. I'm just going to go over some stuff, but I know that just to put into perspective, basically Coliseum was not built in one day. We have worked hard, this body, and we have put you at the head of the school district because we know you can do it. We know you have, you're intelligent. We know you have the ability. You have built a great team. We have the new interim CFO for the school district. And we are going to get things done. Things are not going to be done in one day. And just looking at this PowerPoint, we see all your plan that you want to work. And we want to work with the city. And we want to work with the city councilors. But they're hindering us. And what they're doing is basically hindering our ability to move forward to educate our students. We want to work with you guys. We don't want to make it a he say, she say thing. When you continue to not call one of us and say how we can move forward, and you put stuff on Facebook and attack us, it doesn't work that way. You know my number. You have my email. You have my address. call me, let's go have coffee, and we'll talk about things. But the way you're acting towards a new superintendent does not work that way. But anyway, I have a question for the old members. How did the signed warrants work before? As for the new members, why don't we have that now? How did it came about that we don't have that where 2 school committees sign it? Where did it basically stop working that way? If somebody that used to be here, that's been here for a very long time, when did that stop?
Mr. Sullivan, Adam, you can answer.
We never had that before.
You never had that before?
Never had it before.
Okay. So maybe that's something we can move forward. I am all for it, that we can have that, and moving forward, maybe it will be an easy process. I'm so forward. Also, thank you for dissolving that account 199. It's been a cancerous, and you've solved it. Thank you. This is a great presentation, and I'm willing to basically work with it. And also that, I forgot what the name of it, the training for the six basic steps. I want a training, I want classes, I want to be part of it, how it works, how you plan on implementing it. I definitely want to be part of it and just see how you want to bring it on and everybody get a training class of it. I want to basically see how the finance is going to work for the school side. But thank you. You're doing a great job, and I appreciate it. And I'm sorry that you're basically put through this. Thank you.
Prior to Mr. Gomes, just on the warrant system, I personally brought that up a couple of years ago, but the explanation is that more of the warrant system is done on a town level more than a city, because it will hamper payments and so forth. But the other interesting piece about it was that it's in our policy and it's law that we're supposed to follow that. And, you know, we've identified it, and we just have to work our way to get there just to fix that process. And unfortunately, this had to happen in order for us to follow the law.
Is it a mass law?
Yes, it's mass law, and then it's also in our school committee policy. So,
Good to know.
Thank you. Mr. Gomes.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that very comprehensive yet, detailed presentation overview. Also share the same feelings. Good thing that account 199 is closed. It's good to see that some things are taking place. There's a lot of updates. You are taking the feedbacks seriously, which I really appreciate. The investigation, RSM, the security audit, everything. We took those in, and you guys are taking action. So I applaud y'all for that. A few questions that I have based on this presentation is, one, well, first of all, a statement. I'm very excited, very happy that you mentioned that we're going to start the budgeting process early. Joining the school committee this year was chaotic, for lack of a better word. Came in, we were given the budget already. We were told how it's going to be, the amount, so on and so forth. We didn't basically have a say. And I was looking at the positions that are posted, and then the lack of funds, unfunded positions, and it's a shame. Because when we came here to vote and pass the budget that was provided to us, I argued for a higher budget considering these positions. Because it was mentioned we were in need of those positions, and even if we were not able to fulfill those, we would have to pay compensatory positions. Here we are. But I advocated for those. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but moving forward, we might be able to take care of that. So I'm glad to hear that we're going to start the process early. I don't know the timeline that you have in mind, but that would be something, if you could provide us with that, that would be greatly appreciated. The other thing I wanted to ask, the RSM audit had mentioned that we had multiple people with access to munis and doing overrides and taking other actions. Do we have the proper individuals assigned, having access to munis assigned to specific tasks, so on and so forth?
Yes, and that was actually already completed by the time I arrived. So that was certainly, I think, one of the things that, similar to the 199-99099 account, that was something that was one of the first items on the agenda for the city, the schools, and open architects to work on. So that has already been addressed.
Okay. Good to hear that. The other thing, too, was in regards to the vendor and payroll warranties, which seemed odd that it would be submitted all through the city and then the school would learn about it at the last step. You know, it's service provided to the schools, you know, for the school. So it should be something that should be a collaborative plan, I would say. So seeing the current and then, you know, compared to the proposed requirement, nonsense. Come on.
Information. I think the warrants for the schools are conducted out of administration and then they're sent over to City Hall to the auto-notaris. Okay. You don't see the warrants at all? That's strange.
So that should be something that we definitely need to look at and work together to fix. One thing that I just had a quick question, if you could elaborate on it. It said one of the challenges that we're facing is the sweeping revolving account. What did you mean by that?
Yes, so we have revolving accounts. Those are accounts that sort of feed into it themselves. So like we have one for our food services, or, you know, athletics, or, you know, those are sort of accounts that, you know, where we actually take in money. And so we are working with the city. I believe we have rectified that as of today, that those will be reversed. And so, but one of the things that we really are trying to keep an eye on is just where our funds are, right? And so, and making sure that everybody is of the same understanding when it comes to which funds at the end of the year can get taken, which funds cannot. So those are some of the things that we're working on with the city.
So you said being reversed, so that means there were transactions that took place that the school BPS was not aware of, and okay.
Correct.
And do you know where those funds went to, like for what purposes?
So they would have been brought over to, I don't know. I don't want to say if I don't know for sure.
I mean, we
I
have city CFO here. Do you want to chip in?
Oh, yeah,
that?
he would be able to speak to it.
Troy.
Yeah, so Troy, if you could just take the podium. Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
Would you like me to restate my question, Troy?
No, thank
No?
you. I
Okay.
understood the question. For the folks at home, there's no mic, so I'll speak loudly. At the end of every fiscal year, both the city and the schools close out their budgets. When the city compiles its year-end reporting to the Department of Revenue, thank you. When the city compiles its year-end reporting to the Department of Revenue to calculate what is called free cash, that's essentially the city's cash position at the end of the year. It's a snapshot as of June 30th. That includes closing out any accounts with balances at the end of the fiscal year. So in the process of closing those accounts, our team and the school finance team met to discuss which accounts should be swept and which not. No process is perfect. There was some misunderstanding between the two offices about which should be swept. When we say swept, that means those funds actually go to the city's fund balance and become free cash. So there was some amount of some revolving funds, and we discussed at our meeting this morning whether or not there was a request to sweep those funds or not. To be honest with you, I think the fact that the school and the city finance offices are working together at that detail level is a very positive development. So I think both Trish's office and my team work together to resolve those differences. And so at our meeting this morning, there was some lively discussion about that. And that's how we solve problems, is by having those types of meetings. So so normally those funds would accrue to free cash, and if they belong to the schools, would then be appropriated back. We're working with both Open Architects and the Department of Revenue to determine which funds, if any, should go through that process or which should be returned to the schools.
So within that process of, taking the funds from the revolving account? Is there like a type of like permission, or who signs off on the process? Like, yes, we can take the funds now and allocate into the city's budget. Like, how does that work?
Well, let me be crystal clear. Crystal clear. At no time are we talking about taking school funds and allocating those into the city budget. So let me dispel any notion that that has ever occurred or will ever occur. What we're talking about is closing out year-end balances that would then accrue to free cash that can be reappropriated by the request of the mayor, by the city council. So I think one of the challenges in the past is that, as we all know, the schools in the city operated essentially independently. So what I think the superintendent extremely well and in good detail tried to explain during her presentation is we're building the plane as we're flying it here. So we're trying to put processes in place where there's a deeper level of collaboration between city and school finance teams to make sure that there are, I wouldn't say permissions, but certainly acknowledgments, and most importantly, documentation that those conversations are taking place and things are being done properly.
And with when you say, implementing these plans and strategies, because another challenge that was listed is that the city is implementing these plans and strategies with sometimes no detailed implementation plan that the school is unaware of. So how is that working?
So I think, and again, I think we are devising systems as we proceed. The city, through both Chapter 324 and the statutory responsibilities of the city auditor, have unwavering responsibilities that are not negotiable. The schools have most certainly a desire to conduct business as efficiently as possible, to use the funds to support the students. I haven't encountered a city official yet who doesn't believe in and support that mission. But the balance we have to strike is in the city maintaining its responsibility for oversight with the school's desire and need to operate efficiently. And so that's the middle ground that we're working on right now, and the kinds of procedures that the superintendent talked about that we're working together to try to implement.
Okay. And I would love to hear, like, what are some of the new implementations that has taken place on the city side that has been a challenge to the school side that you guys have encountered recently?
Well, one of our biggest pain points that we've talked about at many of our meetings and at some length today is the returning of invoices. And again, there's a great reason for it. It's because we don't have legally what we need to have by Mass General Law in order to be having those services, providing those services. There is a little bit of gray area, and there's some, because I believe we do if it's on a state contract, right? But like we also have a city charter we have to follow that it has some more detail in it and some more requirements than maybe Mass General Law. So we recognize that there are systems that need to be in place at the school level. The issue that we're facing is the backlog. Of things that are not sort of moving through the process as we create it. So, for example, one of the things that we need to now, that we're going to need to train our admin assistants on is pulling a VIS report off Munis to attach to our invoices. Now, I heard from the auditor that was part of a memo in April. I was not here in April, and again, there was a lot going on here in April. I don't know that anybody read the memo about VIS reports, and certainly no administrative assistants were trained on that. And so I think really what we're thinking about on our level is that we completely understand at the school department side that we need to follow policy and that there are policies that are going to be put in place in order to make sure that the city has the oversight that they need to have. However, when you are part of an organization as big as our school system, policy without an implementation plan is a recipe for disaster. So to have a policy that says we need a VIS report when our admin assistants have not been trained on how to do that, and probably haven't even heard, those terms yet. It was the first time I'd heard it last week. So, these are the kinds of things that we're kind of working through. And And again, for that to kind of come up last week when it hadn't come up earlier the school year, again, so that's like things hadn't been sent back for that particular reason before. They were been sent back for other reasons. And so again, we've been working with the city and trying our best, but I do just want to be transparent about this is the challenge that we are facing. We're doing our best to fill out the template contracts and send the vendors the appendices as required by the city, but we are hitting some roadblocks, because these are new processes that the vendors may not be aware of. So most recently, for example, we had emails today going back and forth where PandaDoc, who's like, we work with 40 different places around the state, and they don't require us to fill this. So now they have their legal department looking at this contract that we have sent. You know what I mean? So and that's actually a great example, because that's an organization where we actually got to the lawyers. There's other organizations where you may send the appendices to an order taker, and they're getting this form that they've never seen, and they're sending it to their supervisor, and then that's the last so these are the kind of things we're working through. And again, to be very transparent, we have a lot that we need to do better on the school side. We don't do the requisition PO process is not in the right order, and that'll be something that I'll be explaining at our next meeting. Even the way the purchase orders are created, like we have a lot of work to do. But even, for example, in my or in the city CFO's perspective, for that VIS report to be pulled, it's being pulled at the time when the goods and services have already been provided, and we're just being invoiced. So at that point, it's like, ship has sailed. So even if we have that check, it's not going to resolve the problem that we're trying to resolve. So these are pain points that any organization is going to go through as we kind of move through these processes. But I do hope that we can start to make, and I think we did today, make a little bit more movement, and hope that we will moving forward. Also, for special education transportation, I was going to bring this up more like during the transportation audit, which I can bring it up again, but I know that has been a pain point. We've received stop payments on those. Now we are working with the city to get those things paid. Now the city council did pass an ordinance, so to speak of something that was actually passed a long time ago, not even a new ordinance, right? This is a while ago, back in May, an ordinance was passed that even though Mass General Law doesn't require us to go out to bid for special education transportation, that because of all of the issues here, to make sure that we are being competitive, that we should be going out to bid. Completely understand that. That being said, I came on in July. By the time I even found out about that ordinance, it was like beginning of August. And again, my goal as the leader of the school system is to get kids the services they need. So we did go through a more like a competitive process that I'll explain during the transportation audit. That was more competitive and that had a greater focus, like I went through them myself, a greater focus on the prices to make sure we were taking the cheapest price. Now, I'm not always saying that that's the best model to take the cheapest price, but that was the sort of our methodology. So we did do that, but we did not have the ability to go out to bid. So we had these transportation roundtable meetings. I was very transparent about the fact that we are not going to be able to have time to go out to bid. But we also have an audit happening. So the auditors said that they would actually support us based on findings of the audit with helping us go out to bid for what we need to go out to bid for by providing us with the specs that we need specifically for our needs. So we were going to wait for that to come back. Our letters of agreement with our private vendors do have a 30-day termination clause, so we made sure that we would be okay to maybe even go out to bid in the middle of the year. If we needed to, and not if we needed to, we knew we needed to, right? That's part of the ordinance. But so that has been the plan. And so this is an example of where I feel that we need to sort of manage our liabilities. Again, we know we haven't been doing things right? But to kind of stop processes while we're figuring it out, we can't really do that either. And so I completely own this decision. I had a choice between not complying with the new ordinance that was not aligned to Mass General Law, or not complying with all of the requirements for our students who are on IEPs, who, and thinking about all of the different groups that would have, very rightfully so, filed suit if we had not been providing those. I mean, we would have had everybody from DESE and the AG's office to the NAACP Office of Civil Rights. The governor would have been here, and they're been here themselves, right? And so in thinking about that, I decided, and again, I own when I make decisions as a leader, I said we were not going to do that. We were going to go ahead and go out to bid later on. So again, I thought there was an understanding, but as of last week, we did have some bills returned for special education transportation. I think as of today, we've made some progress on that, and those will be paid. Again, I am not claiming that our process is perfect and that we're doing it right. We need to be doing things better. We need to go out to bid. We need to comply with the city charter, the city ordinances, state law. But we do need to take it one step at a time. We can't do it all overnight.
I'll say I'm with you there, and I would probably, if I were in your shoes, I would have made the same decision. Again, there's some laws and regulations that we gotta abide by before we come onto the city side. And if I were in your shoe, it would seem like we're not really working collaboratively with you, considering the time, how long you've been here, and the things that have already been, past practice, to then come on now and saying, hey, I need all these things from you, and not really giving you a good timeline, as we just mentioned, working with you in a good timeline, and saying, these are the things we're gonna implement X months from now, so let's work on these things to get to that level. So just coming in and saying, hey, I need these with the invoices coming in now, we need to bid for transportation, we're going to stop paying for the service already rendered. It's absurd, And the other thing, too, that's upsetting is that it's always been like that. It was never an issue. It has gone in front of the city council, it has come to us. It hasn't been an issue. They never said, let's stop paying these vendors and do it properly. But now it has become an issue, which is very interesting. And I hope the city councilors are listening, because hearing your explanation, it seems like you have a plan and you know how you want to do it and implement this plan, which is, to my opinion, more beneficial and well-structured than what is actually taking place right now. We can just stop all vendors and say, hey, we're going to go out and audit this or bid it out. There's an audit going on. We have a lot of things in progress. Let's wait until these are done so we have more information, and then we can take appropriate steps to a good, well-structured system. So I really hope they're listening and reconsidering their decisions. But yeah, we talk about collaboration, transparency, and this doesn't sound helpful at all. Like there's lack of collaboration, honestly. If I come in as a new superintendent and there's all these, let me not curse in here, all these stuff going on, past practice, so on and so forth, no proper procurement, no proper bidding, nothing, but we were paying for all these services. RSM did an audit, and I questioned this. There were invoices that were coming in, getting paid, and then the school was going in to create a work order. Make it make sense. You do that first, you check for the funds, and then someone comes in, does the work, sends the invoice, and you pay. But we were paying for the service rendered without proper work order. Now, transportation, which we have to provide, has become an issue, and then they're going to stop paying for this. I want to see what's going to happen if they stop paying. The vendors don't come in, don't provide their services, and see how we're going to handle the situation. I don't want to take much time. I have one last question, and then I'll let other members take a piece of the pie. I just wanted to make sure. No, it's really upsetting, all the stuff that's going on. We talk about collaboration and transparency, but here we are. I just wanted to ask if you have proper access to, like, I heard you mention earlier, our account, the revolving account, at least for the school side, like the funds that were allocated for the schools and like for us to use for our students. Do you have access, or at least like oversight to these accounts and whatnot, the funds?
Yes, there is a particular munis permission that we would love for our city CFO to have. I believe so there are some things that we would like to be able to edit those accounts. Isn't that right? Am I saying that right? All right. And so there's certain, again, we understand why we don't have certain permissions, right? And why it takes like 10 emails to like get this person permission because of what happened in the past. That being said, I would love for, you know, our city or our school, you know, interim CFO to have things like that access, that greater access should be granted. So, you know, I think we're getting there is my answer. Yes, that's my answer. Not yet. We love to
Why
say that in
aren't we
education.
there?
Not yet, yeah.
What's up, Mr. Gomes?
Yeah, I'll yield for
All
now.
right, Mr. Vega.
So it's difficult to stay focused because what viewers at home don't know is that Mr. Gomes has impeccable handwriting, and I'm looking at his pad and looking at my pad, and you know, feels like two different stories. So, like everyone said, thank you for today's presentation, and I think it's super timely. Like, I mean, like a bunch of other members of the committee, we received these bulletins from MASC, and it just so happens that on the front page of MASC in this edition, it's best practices for school finances. And there are a lot of things that are listed in here. There are 7 items that are listed in here. It's reassuring to know that every one of them was somehow addressed in the presentation, the plan that you shared today. But I just want to share number 1 and number 2. Best practices for school finance. Number 1, it all begins with the superintendent. Right? Number 2, there is no substitute for a strong relationship with your school business official. So in Dr. Tahiliani and in Trish Boyer, we have 1 and 2 covered, right? We have a depth of understanding, a depth of knowledge, and the ability to craft plans that could be executed tomorrow with collaboration. So that's very exciting. Mr. Gomes asked all my questions, so I'm left with some house cleaning things and some clarification, right? You mentioned that, you know, Munis is a beast that's getting under control, that we're going to figure out how to leverage the features that go with it. You said that you've implemented DESI codes. And so for folks at home, when you say DESI codes, what are you talking about, and what does implementation look like?
So when we're creating our budget, so at the end of the year, we actually have to pull an end of year report that we send to DESI that outlines all of our expenses so that they can double check that we're meeting net school spending, that we are spending our money appropriately, that we are meeting all of our requirements. So, and obviously budgets have codes too. Like, you know, when you are creating budget, you have lines that have codes. And so it's, you know, always like a best practice is certainly for us to have those same codes, right? It's just, it makes it more streamlined. Obviously, they've kind of set out the roadmap for us. If they're like, these are the lines we're looking for at the end of the year, this is what we want from you. I mean, they make it so simple. Now, it's not that simple, right, as we're creating and kind of cleaning things up. But that's our goal, is to make sure that we're drilled down to their level and that we're aligned so that when we are speaking to DESI, we're speaking that same language. That way, when you're creating the end of year report, you're not, you know, you're pulling things almost directly into it. It just makes, because the end of year report is an undertaking, always. And so it just makes it that much simpler.
Excellent, thank you. So now that Munis is coming more under our control, we're taming that beast. Will we continue, like, when I say we, I mean, I guess I mean both school committee and city, continue using, it's my understanding from both the report and doing my own digging, that we've, been using or outsourcing some consulting to a consultant in Florida. Will we be able to move away from that, especially now that we've got this new relationship with Munis?
I mean, not immediately.
Okay.
Again, I always like to transition slowly.
Okay.
That's always my method, is I want to make sure things are in place and working before we ever kind of subtract anything out. So, so yes, I would, again, like I've been saying, implementation, it should always be step by step.
Okay.
So that will be the goal, but that's not where we are now.
Gotcha.
Oh,
Okay. We've, in this meeting and previous meetings, used the term compensatory services quite a bit. For folks at home, what are compensatory services?
So when we are unable to provide services that are outlined in a student's individualized education plan, because those are mandated services, those are their requirements that, by law, it's a legally binding agreement. So in the case that we weren't able to provide those services last year for a number of reasons, it can be, a teacher being absent, or it can also being, us unable to hire. It can have to do with certification and staffing. It had to do with COVID. Back when COVID, we had a lot of compensatory services to provide when that was all said and done. So there are many different reasons you may have to provide compensatory services, but my understanding generally of our compensatory services from last year is we were understaffed. We did not have all of the staff that we needed. We're seeing that right now. Those unfunded positions that we have added, it may seem like a lot, but we've actually been very judicious with how we've added them, and there are still students and multilingual learners especially where we need to provide greater services. But obviously we are prioritizing those services that are absolutely mandated by law, and that starts with the IEP, and that starts with those that we didn't provide last year. So that's why you see so much in compensatory services, because that's priority one.
Yeah, excellent. You mentioned the impact that having those unfilled compensatory positions has. I don't know if you know this or if it's a question for someone else, but how was City Hall verifying the appropriateness of the requests if the superintendent, school CFO, and the school committee were not involved in those requests coming from departments?
So, they would ask, and this is actually, sort of the situation that we are kind of addressing it is good that we have a collaborative or that we're trying to move towards more communication and collaboration, because it is about us educating, City Hall, who the education is not what they necessarily know. So there will be questions about what is this, why is this, that kind of thing. And so, we provide answers, the best we can, but sometimes it can be hard to articulate, why we need certain things. Obviously compensatory services is a really easy one, but there are other things that have been, harder to articulate.
In closing, I think the recommendation to have a joint committee between the city side and the school side meeting quarterly is brilliant, and I think it's something that we definitely need to implement. Because we have to be honest about a lot of things, right? We have to be honest about how we look at ourselves as a body, right? That report articulated that previous iterations of this body failed to fulfill their responsibilities. And so I think on some level, when I think about our colleagues on City Council, there's been an understandable amount of concern. I think that has inadvertently led to overreach into areas that are clearly the school committee's purview or in the superintendent's purview. But I can understand it, and I think that's really where things have to start. Like, this joint committee could provide an opportunity to provide context and understanding. I think if I was on the city council, I would have a lot of questions for the school committee, right? So I think it starts with being able to think about the point of view on the other side, also being realistic and recognizing when an overreach is an overreach and needs to stop. And also recognizing when, we step into our roles as, the financial leaders of the school. So again, it starts with the superintendent, Dr. Tigiani. This is the beginning this is more than a plan. This is the beginning of a turnaround. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vega. I do agree with you on the overreach, but I don't want to blame the whole city council, because it's certain individuals, and we know who they are. But Mayor,
I want to thank Superintendent. I don't think this is on.
It is.
Is it on? Mm-hmm. It's my Brockton accent. You might not understand me. I think that was really fantastic. I love the idea of a DESE mediator to work on the joint committee. I think that's brilliant. I hadn't thought of that. I want to work with the Vice Chair and Council President Rodriguez to get this instituted as quick as we can. I do also, just those that weren't in attendance this morning, it was Tony, myself, and Priya. There was some great communication. People were very spirited, right? And there's also some anguish going on, right, and frustration. but we have a really wonderful person in Mike Morris. He's the procurement officer. He's been here for decades. The great thing is that some of the frustration will be alleviated when the schools hire a procurement officer, and I want to thank Dr. T because she's been really working diligently on that. So, you know, we have to abide by the law. We cannot put any students in a harmful manner, in an unsafe manner, and we definitely, the commitment today from everybody in that room is we are not stopping buses. Buses are going to bring kids to school, simple as that. But also, we need to look at where PREA has come from other municipalities, what they've done, right? And maybe they've done things we haven't thought about. So I thought that was a great, you know, 11 out of the 15. There's a few that were within my purview that I'm going to institute, as well as a few on the city council. But we really have a lot of work to do, but we're trending in the right direction. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to touch up on a few things, you know, relative to transportation. Oh, sorry, Mr. Sullivan, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you for the presentation. Just making sure that's on. My question is about the joint committee that you're trying to establish. Are you talking about the entire school committee and the?
I could answer to that. A few meetings ago, I did put a motion on the floor to create that joint committee, but we did have some pushback from this members of this committee to create that, where myself and the mayor will talk to the council president so we can lay that out and how that looks. So we did take a motion on that, and that's on record. So if you want, I could have Melinda pull up those minutes, and you can.
No, I'm just asking a question. I read it up here for the first time.
I'm answering your question that.
No, I wasn't asking you, Tony. I was asking the superintendent.
Well, as the chairman of this committee, I'm telling you that it was already brought to this body. And if you don't believe me, the mayor's right here, members are here, that we did take it to a vote, but we had a member that had a pushback on that.
Just for point of information to the chair, the only thing that we didn't discuss that night was what superintendent said, a DESI mediator, a third party. That's something that is really helpful.
And to be clear, yes, that was a just a suggestion from our team, but the joint committee was a recommendation of the investigators.
Yes.
You all set, Mr. Sullivan?
All set?
Thank you. Again, just to talk about, you know, when it talks about transportation, you had an ordinance that was created, but at the same time that when you create an ordinance to that magnitude, the school department was left out of that equation. So that hampers what we have to do here. So if, you know, some city councilors want to create ordinances that affects the school department, I think it's conducive for you to bring in the school officials and the leadership to make sure that it's working properly, because at the end of the day, we're just trying to make sure we get our students to school safely and doing it in a way that's going to save us some money. The other piece is that I'm going to just jump right here. When we talk about processes and things that we go forward, we always get a pushback. Well, it's always done this way, it's always done that way, but it's in the policy. Just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean that it was done that way the proper way. I mean, we learned that when we were doing our subcommittee roles by just reading the policy, which dictates in writing. Not that I created, it's there before I came here, probably before anybody here. So we just have to make sure that, you know, we're all on the same page when it comes to that. And then the other piece, you know, we talked about the city council, you know, joint committee, 3 members on this side versus with the council, with the superintendent, city CFO, city solicitor, to make sure to see how can we combine services to save us some funds, because at the end of the day, we're all city residents, we're all taxpayers. We want to save as much money as possible so that we can put a lot more money into education to make sure that we educate our students. But moving on, we will move on to the overview of the accounts review procedure.
Do you have it? Oh, or is that Sarah? No?
Trish, do you want to? Yes, if you can jump in and basically give an overview. Sorry about that. An overview of the accounts process. Just before that, I was on the accounts review last year. I mean, we did have an accounts review, but everything that we're going on, there's a certain process where you're reviewing accounts, but we're doing it after the services and after it's even been approved. And then you're basically disapproving. There's a bunch of accounts that, you know, invoices that we didn't approve that should have been looked into. So I'll give the floor to our business administrator. We'll talk how that procedure looks. Thank you, Trish.
Good evening, everybody. So you are correct in that when the Accounts Review Committee were looking at the warrants, you were looking at them after the fact, after the bills have been paid and the checks have been sent. And what we should be doing, as was mentioned in the audit, is that you should all be reviewing both the vendor warrants and the payroll warrants before they are even paid. Because if you have a question or if we find an error, it can be stopped beforehand. And so the process that we are going to be undertaking is exactly that. It will be reviewed by those of us, as Dr. Tahiliani mentioned, and by the school committee. And then what should happen is also the warrants should be brought to the rest of the school committee after the fact. So we will be having people review them before they get paid, and then the whole school committee as a body should be reviewing and accessing the warrants after the fact.
All right, thank you. Have any questions, Mr. Gomes?
Hello. Yeah, I have a few questions actually. So with that, does that mean we're getting some funds back? Because I know a lot of payments that were made that we did not see anything about those.
Not that I'm aware of.
Also, like, I'll try to be brief. I had brought this up like a few meetings back. We did receive an invoice from Nordstrom Backman for the investigation. That never came in front of us. I never saw the contract. I never saw the invoice for the payment. But yeah, it was paid and it shows on our records. So
Right.
how are we gonna go about that?
So what happened with that was there was a Zoom meeting in early June, if I recollect correctly, asking if this school department can pay that bill because the city office did not have funds for that. And at the time, we were looking at a $10 million carryover from FY24 into FY25. So it was very briefly discussed that we can probably do that because it did benefit us as well, or the services of that contract benefited us as well. Probably maybe the third week of June, an email came in with an invoice, with that invoice attached. And so it was requested by the previous interim superintendent to approve that, and it was approved. And then the purchase order was made, and then the invoice was paid. So for example, if you had seen the accounts payable warrant, as we should be doing it beforehand, it could have been stopped right at that moment.
So who sent that invoice to us?
The city side.
The city side. And oh, I have a lot of questions.
Are you all set?
Do we have time?
Do what
for-
time? We have Mrs. Oliver.
Quick question. So this was for, can you tell me exactly how much this was for? And it's for FY24 for FY25. Can you please make that public to the?
Yes, I don't have the exact amount in front of me, except that it was
Is it for $447,000?
plus.
And it, plus, yes. And this was for FY24.
Yes.
Did this make us into a negative, into a legal account?
Yes.
Was this ever came about to this body?
No.
Thank you. So this is why things are not always brought to our attention. And this is why this body have asked for transparency and asked for people to take accountability for their nonsense. that's continue to be done behind our back. Because this is a big bill that was never brought to us. This is an amount that we could fill so many classrooms. We could buy books. We could have done so many things. We could be paying transportation. We could have been doing so many things for our kids on the IEP and 504. So many things. But thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do we have any follow-up questions for Mrs. Boyer? Just to piggyback off of that, this is one of the things that, the old way, it's unfortunate that we're here and it happened. I'm upset about it, because I'm in these meetings and, just to figure out that 447,000 put us in a negative of 390,000 is absurd. Like I like to hold those people accountable, but I'm not their boss. But there's a process, and when you talk about processes and read out laws, it wasn't followed. It should have been followed. But with that being said, I will move to item number 5. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just had one question. The recommendation was for the payroll and the warrants, the vendor and the payroll warrants. Recommendation was to have 2 school committee members. So Dr. T would review it with two school committee members, however this body determines it. Trish, I just want to understand that. So then after it was approved by those members and it's paid, then the next scheduled meeting, it would be on our agenda so the entire body could do like a confirmatory vote?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But again, that's after the fact that they would have been processed to be paid.
But reviewed by at least 2 out of the 8 of us?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Follow-ups? No. Number 5, which is unpaid bills.
Yes, so in your packet, you do have a list of unpaid bills. And so our hope is that the school committee will authorize to pay these bills in the amount of $460,789.46. This is a request to allow the below listed departments to pay previous year's bills from the current year's FY25 operating budget, and listed below are the department's descriptions, vendors, invoice numbers, date of invoice, dates of services, and amount. And just, again, we are transitioning this year. We are still working on cleaning things up this year. In the future, we will not be paying for, our goal is not to pay for services from a previous fiscal year with fiscal year funds from this year. In fact, we should not be doing that. That being said, these services have been rendered. We do have a responsibility to pay for services that we received. And so I am recommending, again, so that we can start with a clean slate, to move forward with paying these bills.
Any questions by any members? Mr. Vega.
It's really a how question. So these unpaid bills go back to FY22. How, I'm just trying to figure out the mechanics of this. How do we not pay a bill for 3 fiscal years?
So there are actually several different reasons or circumstances that have led to that. Do you want to speak to it a little bit, Trish? Or do you
Trish, before you speak, is there a timeline that you need this approved? Is this something that you want to, can we take action on it? Because there are numerous invoices, bills that I've seen. I've read this one because this was, but it was a very large file, and I just don't want the members just to come in here tonight and just approve all of these without having a chance to properly review all of those invoices.
I agree. There's, some of these vendors have been calling, emailing, some of them are very irate, of course. But I would not ask you to sign anything or approve anything that you hadn't seen or don't approve of. You can sign them, you can approve them all. You can pick and choose what you approve and what you don't approve of. I had asked all of these department heads if these invoices were in fact legitimate and if the services or goods were provided, and it was all confirmed. As for why some of these have gone on for a few years, I cannot answer that. As for the FY24 invoices, we were given a date of July 15th of 24 to get every invoice that we had paid. But all of the invoices on this list for FY24 came in after July 15th. So we were not even able to get them processed. And that's probably the same procedure that happened in 23 and 22. Why 22 never got caught up in 23, I don't know the answer to that. And as for 23, I can just imagine that as invoices came in, that was the summer that a lot of staff members were gone, and you know, the chaos kind of happened. So I imagine that that's why those never got processed as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Oliver?
Can we just make sure at least the vendors for transportation is at least paid for? I just don't want any issues with that kids, especially IEPs and 504s, to have any issues with getting to schools. And I just want to make a quick statement. I want to thank Dr. T for getting this all resolved with the transportation issue. Can we just make sure those are taken care of?
Is that in the form of a motion or a vote?
Yeah, in form of like a motion to make sure all the current invoices for transportation vendors are paid.
On the motion, the floor is yours, Mayor.
Just on the motion, two things. Trish, are these encumbered invoices for prior year?
No, they are not.
Okay.
Because they weren't expected at the time that fiscal year was open.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just point of information, this does happen on the city side. This does happen on the city council, where we have to go to a prior year. Typically, it's encumbered, but we have to get approval from the elected body. But we had the meeting this morning, and for the transportation contracts, one thing that the vice chair, and I'm not going to steal your thunder, I thought it was a good, do you mind sharing that? It was a good suggestion, the 10 days.
Oh, so thank you, Mayor, on
Yeah.
that. You know, when the whole transportation, I had 278 contracts. To be honest, I did lose my mind when I seen it, because there was no dollar figure, and there's certain things. Transportation, we know there was going to be some hiccups, but some of the vendors are delaying sending us invoices, which delays payment in the processes. My recommendation was that on the contracts with our transportation vendors, there needs to be a notation that once that invoice, it should sent within 10 days. There needs to be a hard number so that nothing's being delayed on our end. So here's the invoice, you have 10 days to sign the contract versus sending those invoices. So everybody was on the same page with that. It's just accountability for something new. So thank you for that one, Mayor.
Thank you.
Motion was made to approve on the motion.
I just want to throw it, I appreciate the fact that, like, we should take, like, you know, of the idea of giving more time on this. The only thing that I wonder about is that, given the fact that each department head has reviewed these and verified the legitimacy of it, I don't know that we can do much more than that. And these are some folks who've been waiting 3 years to get paid. You know, and I've been in communication with some folks, you know, who are Brockton businesses, who are waiting for Brockton Public School to cut them a check. So I'm just, you know, it makes me feel like we should and have to take action on this as soon as possible. I think we should vote on the entirety.
Second, I agree.
Motion was already made by Mrs. Oliver. If you want to amend your motion, because nobody seconded anyway.
I'll remove the motion for the vendors only and make a motion to approve to authorize the school department to pay $460,789.46, $100,000 towards the bill for service rendered in the prior year, which is FY 22, 23, 24, and 25.
Motion by Mrs. Oliver, properly seconded by Mr. Vega. Show of hands.
22, 25.
Show of hands. Unanimous, it carries. Thank you very much. We will move to item number 6, if we can be conducive of time, which is the school committee expense for fiscal years 22, 23, 24, and 25. Where are we?
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Mayor Sullivan, the chair.
So
floor is yours.
relative to, there's been some questions coming up about myself and getting a stipend to being on this committee. And I just want to be extremely transparent about this. And I spoke to the enterprise today. It had been determined, not by me, but it had been determined that as chair, I was entitled lawfully to a stipend as a member of this committee, and it was permissible. It was vetted out by several departments, CFO's office on the school side, CFO on the city side, city HR, city auditor, and the law department. I also want to make it clear that upon my own volition, I went to the auditor in September of '23 after the deficit came and blew up and told her that myself personally, I wanted to forego and not get another stipend. I had asked all my department heads in the city side, do cost containment. It was a personal decision. It wasn't going to be a lot of money, $150-something a week, but I have not gotten a dime in over a year. And I want that to go on the record. But I also want to let you know that I have asked today, Megan Bridges, the city solicitor, revisit that decision. If that decision was a mistake or it was erroneous, I'm going to return every single dime as a reimbursement. And I wanted all of you to hear that directly from me tonight. I know there's all this garbage on social media. You know me. I didn't do anything wrong. I was told it was permissible, but there's human error. And if it's a mistake, I will rectify it and pay every penny back. And I just wanted you to know that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So you can see your form here. It's school committee expenses. I just wanted the members to know that we do actually have our own account for funds, and these are one of the things that I think that should be done on our monthly report, is to see the actual numbers of what's in our account and where these funds are going relative to what we what we approve and up into including what our pay are, and as you can see from our conferences, we've bought yearbooks for students during COVID. There's many different items on here. But Mrs. Sullivan.
I don't know. I think this list of school committee expenses is old. I mean, it is currently being done, yes, but a lot of these things were done when the school committee was not getting paid very well. Last year, the school committee got a raise, and they get expense account also. So a lot of this stuff needs to be taken off, and we need to be paid for it ourselves. This money needs to go back to the students and the teachers.
Yeah, when we craft our budget, we have that opportunity to do that. That's why I wanted the school committee to see exactly.
Because I didn't
what's
even know half the
items.
stuff that's even on here.
I
Okay?
totally agree
The committee
with you.
needs to discuss and needs to take off most of this stuff. I mean, we do need to pay the dues to MASC. But if you go to any trainings or anything like that, that should come out of your own expense account. If you go to any parties or, and I know we do need to talk about some of these as a committee.
Oh, that's why I wanted the committee to have this,
Yes.
so we can vet it out, so when we craft our budget, so we see what these items are. So we
Most
can
of that
remove it. So-
stuff is from years and years and years ago.
That's-
Has never been cleaned up.
Yep. No, I totally agree with you. That's
So
why
I
I had
agree
it
that
from
most of it needs to be gone.
That's why I had it from FY22
I
until
thank you
current.
very much for bringing it up.
Thank you. That's what it is.
Good job.
I brought it up for a purpose.
Mr. Vice Chair, I was
Good
just
job.
told by Melinda that we may have a problem if we don't conclude in 2 hours. We're going to run out of batteries. Is that correct?
Okay, one last question,
Yeah.
Mrs. Oliver.
I think some of this is under like FY23, and just being part of like a committee, I think a lot of this, like just events, I think we should show face and represent our committee to be there, like NAACP, MLK breakfast. I think we should be there, and if I don't understand why that's an issue. So I don't think some of this should be an argument. I'm just saying, like some of it's not a party. We have to be there. We have to show face and then represent our students and our community that we represent. Just saying.
Yes, but that can come out of our
I totally
expense
agree with you,
account.
Mrs. Oliver, but this is something I just wanted the committee This is the first time, some members, long time, this is the first time they've seen it, but, you know, you need this information so when we craft the budget, so we can because we have the financial responsibility, so we have to have the financial responsibility on our account as well. So with that being said, with time, I will any other business by any other members relative to finance. I will also work with the superintendent and Trish and try to schedule another finance meeting moving forward, also with the chair. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Sullivan, properly seconded by Mr. Gomes. A show of hands. Meeting's adjourned.